Okay, so step one of the build is to dismantle Prusa's bed. Clear this guy off, get a little space. You need your T10 Torx driver. These are generally on there quite tight. The first thing we're doing is removing the bed. This is iFixit's driver. They do a very good job of the parts. And one thing to note is that the bed has magnets in it. See that? So every once in a while the screw does something all by its lonesome. Gotta kind of keep an eye on it. Once those are off, we're almost done. We're going to replace this first, just because it's available. You won't need the Torx driver anymore. There's a 2.5mm Allen key. Just really nice, like, that's a good connection. Prusa does very good work. Here's his part. Oops, that's the wrong part. There's Prusa's part, there's my part. You can see we've just cut off a tiny bit. You don't need a lot of clearance, but we need the space for this guy. And this is not, I did not design it, I just took the official Prusa file and shortened it. We need this nut. Should be a good and tight fit. These are all printed in carbon fiber PETG. Prusa's parts, I think, are just plain PETG, so technically this is an upgrade. We're using the same hardware that Prusa uses. There's no reason to swap it out. So, that is sorted. We'll set this aside for a bit. Work on this guy. First thing we're going to do is take off the standoffs. A lot of these are a little loose. We're going to keep the bottom pieces. We're going to keep 3 of the standoffs, mainly the center row. These should all be, once they're kicked loose, just easy to pop off my hand. For the top and bottom, we're going to use our hex standoffs. Oops, that one got away from me. So we have 6 of these, 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom. Another thing helpful to have is a little tiny magnet. Oh, what? Apparently it's not helpful when a Prusa is using stainless steel parts. It's important to tighten these on because you won't be able to access them later. So we'll use the 5mm hex key. Actually, I'm just going to use this guy. I think that'll make my life a little easier. You can flip this up on its side. And then use a 2.5mm hex driver. That guy. I want to line up the flats. So the flats are flat facing the front of the machine. Just to make life a little nicer. That way these guys fit on well. Yeah. Looks like I designed it that way. Center one doesn't actually make a difference, but I align the flats anyways because it's about details. One thing I did do off camera is actually put the foam feet on. I really don't like the way the cable sticks out the bottom, and it's would actually be hitting the desk if you didn't have these foam bumpers on. So put the foam on first. Alright, so now we have the standoffs on. We need to get these off completely. So it's the 5.5 mil hexed. And it's a U-bolt, so you don't really need to worry about. Not going to use those. If you do drop something in the channel, get it out before you forget about it. There's also the center screw here that, oh, there you go. We don't need, so 3 of these we're not going to use again. Those 3 I used, we're not using those screw holes as they get in the way. Right. Let's do the zip tie first because it's a little easier. We're going to zip tie on this bearing because there is a very low clearance between the motor and the bearing, and the arm is actually getting mounted here. So I'd rather have it clamped on, but I wasn't able to design a clamp that would do it well. This guy is in the belt path. Just going to slip that guy around. And the main thing is to get the zip tie head underneath the bed. Not a huge fan of the zip tie mount, but I believe it will be plenty strong because we'll have clamps, printed clamps on these 2 guys. I guess one tool we forgot about. Should be in your shop anyway. Pair of side cutters. Out of here. I don't think we need the side cutters again anyways. So you want that good and tight, bearing well lined up. I mean, you should have very little play vertically. Zip ties are nice and strong and flat. For these guys, we have these 2 LM8 UU clamps. You notice we got a corner on one side. This guy is all chamfered off there. That's so that it can slide in between the rod and the frame. There's not much clearance, but there's just enough. I'm going to stick the square nuts in first. Two 2mm hex key, hex driver. I always snug the ones on the inside first because if the nut falls out, then you have a bit of a pain getting it back and reattached. very firm. You really should not be able to bend things at all. You need quite a lot of rigidity so that the gears mesh and continue to mesh properly. Alright, once that is on, let's start by inserting. Bushings should slide right in. These guys pop right onto their respective corners. You notice the already popped these guys in earlier. You do want to adjust this so that your tension is at its lowest point. You can see how that works to push the rod out. You don't get a lot of travel, but you don't need a lot of travel. And more to the point, there isn't a lot of space over here once you put the rest of the printer together. So these will be actuated from the side using the ball end of your hex key. This rod is actually captured in here, so it needs to be put in place first. And that might look a little thin to you, but all the force is going in towards the printer, so it really doesn't need any strength at all. So there is your idler set up. The steel is smooth enough that the belt's just going to roll right over it. Found that easier than putting in bushings. Really just wasn't space. For the center of the bed, you have these mounted upside down. They're actually just stuck on there. I'm not going to mount the bed yet. This guy's already got his bushing inserted. Should be fairly easy to get on. I'm going to insert the rod here. This is real tight, a little bit of soapy water, just a tiny bit smooth on there. Should get you sorted. That wasn't down there. You got it through enough. We have our square nut in the nut trap on our clamp. Right on the edge of the rod. Don't need a lot of force on this guy. No big deal. He goes on. I cut this with a good maybe 3 or 5 millimeter clearance on there. Then on the roller gear, it's the one with the clamp, not the D slot. We have 2 nut traps, one on either side. This guy needs his nut. We've already got. You'll see that the clamping forces this entire area. It goes right on the front. This is the carbon fiber pet G, and this one I do believe needs to be that strong for this clamping. It needs to be quite tight, so you don't have any issues there. So there is most of your bed. Put this sheet on. Before we do that, we're going to attach the motor. To attach the motor, we're actually using, I'll show you, the 2 screws that come with the Prusa, and mounting in those holes. So you see this fits right on there. That's why we captured this little ridge in place. It's not really there for a purpose. On the inside, we have all the holes for the motor. You cannot take this off when the motor is attached. So if you install your motor first, you're going to be stuck. You need to install the bracket, then the motor. Fairly basic. The motor mount Doesn't have a huge amount of constraint. We're using washers in this guy to get a better clamp out of it. Not sure if it's really required, but this motor needs to be mounted to be very rigid so that we don't have any teeth slipping when we're trying to drive the belt. A little not happy about how far this gear sticks out. That's why I was thinking about redesigning this section. But we have the same 10mm screw, square nut. This is onto a D slot, so this screw doesn't have to be crazy tight. Just reasonably tight. Oops. And all these are, of course, clamped in place by the bed. Alright, next step for the bed. These little center guys mounted. Oops. So down the center of the bed, we're mounting these little rollers. Not really rollers, but just support guides. And these are using the original Prusa standoffs. Just because, you know, you can feed the belt through after the fact. Actually, we're going to do a little tape work first. Forgot. I'm going to put a little piece of tape down on here, just to make sure the belt doesn't have an opportunity to catch on anything. The idea is to coddle the belt, make sure that it's never going to encounter any sharp surfaces, sharp transitions. And these, you know, if you got some, you might as well use it. That look real good. So the belt can be laid down next. You don't have to do this, you can feed it through later, but it's a lot easier to do it when the whole thing's apart. So there should be a little bit of resistance on the bed, as these guys are just rubbing it. We'll see. That should be good. Put your heat bed steel sheet in there. You notice one thing I don't like about the drive system is when the belt is on there tight, you can't get the heat bed or the steel sheet off. So you have to undo the bed before removing the steel sheet. The main reason I put these in the front is because it looks cool and because there was good mounting points. But having them mounted on the rail and engaging back here might be a future revision. We should be able to line these up real good. Single piece of Capiton down. I usually cut one piece. It's a little extra long. Attach it to this side. And we have a belt tensioner, so we don't need to worry about getting the tension all the way out. We just need to worry about getting the belt lined up as straight as we can. The belt in this system is designed to be easily replaceable and cheap, so you don't have to worry about getting it absolutely perfect, but closer better than farther. I'm only using the scissors because I feel like people yell at me if I use my knife right on there. That is that. That is a belt. Oh no, she doesn't move. Restrictions. We need to adjust our tensioners. Now for the tension, it gets a little easier. I'm using a 4-sided screwdriver, so I just do quarter turns and try and keep them roughly even. What I'm really looking for, you can hear the tension. Should be able to turn it by hand. You don't want to go overboard, but it is sort of a self-loading system where if you tension it to the point where you can't turn it by hand, this motor is not going to be able to do it. Should be relatively easy, and a lot of the imperfections will actually flatten out with a bunch of rolling. This is a 0.05 inch bed of Duralar Mylar film. So we're trying this guy out. It's had good results on my other machine, so I want to try it out on the Prusa Mini. It's a lot cheaper than the Capiton, and a lot easier to obtain too. But anyway, next video, we'll be assembling the rest of the Mini Prusa, then we'll work on the control system. It's just quick wiring that. That's that.